Story 1: The Island of Shadows. The summer of my 8th grade year was supposed to be a carefree escape, a fleeting moment of youthful adventure before the weight of high school descended. My friends, Greg, Jay, Mark, and I, were an odd quartet, bound by shared quirks and a love for the obscure. We weren't the popular kids, but we had each other, and that was enough. Or so I thought. When Greg invited us to his family's summer home on a secluded island in Maine's Casco Bay, it felt like a golden ticket to a world we'd only dreamed of. Little did I know that week would etch itself into my memory as a nightmare I'd carry for years. The journey to the island was a grueling odyssey. Greg's father, a wiry man with a permanent scowl and an obsession with cleanliness, drove us in a van that reeked of antiseptic. My sinuses were a mess, and every sneeze earned me a glare from the driver's seat, his eyes boring into me through the rearview mirror. The tension in the car was palpable. Mark and I bickered over trivialities. Jay stared out the window, and Greg fidgeted nervously. The ferry ride to the island was the only reprieve, the salty breeze and the rhythmic churn of the water momentarily lifting our spirits. The summer house was a quaint, weathered structure nestled among pines, its clapboard exterior faded by years of sea air. Inside, it felt like stepping into another era. Creaky floorboards, faded photographs, and a pervasive sense of being watched. The island itself was a dreamscape, a place where time seemed to blur. Neighbors greeted Greg by name, their smiles warm but fleeting, as if they shared a secret we weren't privy to. We spent our days biking along winding paths, the wind in our hair, and the promise of adventure around every corner. But beneath the idyllic surface, something felt off. On the second day, I realized my prized Barcelona snapback cap was missing. It wasn't just a hat, it was a symbol of my obsession with soccer, a rare piece of memorabilia I cherished. I tore apart my bag, my bunk, the entire house, but it was gone. Greg suggested I'd left it on the beach, but I knew better. I'd brought it back. Devastated, I confided in Greg's dad, who dismissed my distress with a curt, "Get over it, kid." His words stung, but I swallowed my tears and tried to move on. The next day brought another loss. My pen collection, a quirky obsession I'd nurtured for years, was incomplete. One of my favorites, a sleek silver fountain pen, was missing. Jay swore he'd seen me holding it while biking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The losses piled up, each one chipping away at my sense of security. That night, unable to face Greg's dad again, I feigned illness and retreated to bed, hoping sleep would dull the ache. I awoke at 3 a.m., the house shrouded in darkness. As I lay there trying to will myself back to sleep, a faint sound pierced the silence, whispering, so soft it was almost imperceptible. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they were unintelligible, a low, eerie murmur. It seemed to come from Mark's bunk, the top one across the room, but the shadows obscured my view. Fear rooted me to the spot. I wanted to call out, to demand who was awake, but something held me back, a primal instinct that warned me to stay silent. Eventually, I blocked out the sound and drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself it was a dream. We played games in the yard, the sun casting long shadows across the grass. But when Mark excused himself to use the bathroom, something caught my eye. In a second-floor window, I saw him, staring down at us, his expression blank, almost lifeless. My heart sank. Greg's house didn't have a second-floor bathroom. I glanced at Jay and Greg, but they were oblivious, laughing over some joke. When I looked back, the window was empty. That night, I feigned illness again, unable to shake the image of Mark's face. Alone in the house while the others went to dinner, I paced the creaky floors, my mind racing. The whispering, the missing items. Mark's eerie presence. It all pointed to something sinister. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I crept to Mark's bunk and rummaged through his duffel bag. What I found stopped my heart. My Barcelona cap, my nail clippers, an extra toothbrush, and, most disturbingly, a pair of my underwear. My hands trembled as I dug deeper, unearthing a notebook that would haunt me for years. The pages were a descent into madness. Sketched with a frenzied intensity, They depicted grotesque creatures, monsters with hollow eyes, twisted limbs, and gaping maws. Scenes of violence followed, people being crushed, stabbed, tortured in ways that made my stomach churn. But the worst was yet to come. Toward the end, the drawings turned personal. There I was, rendered in chilling detail, my face contorted in agony as I hung on a cross, my legs severed. Another page bore my name, scrawled obsessively hundreds of times. The final page was a gut punch, my name in bold letters, followed by 4 words that sent ice through my veins. I'll do it tomorrow. I was shaking, tears blurring my vision, when I heard the front door open. Panicked, I shoved the notebook back into the bag, but not before tearing out a single page as proof. I ran to Greg's dad, my voice trembling as I spilled everything. His skepticism turned to horror when I showed him the notebook. He ordered me to put everything back, his voice tight with fear. As I did, I made a split-second decision to keep the torn page, tucking it into my pocket. The trip ended abruptly. Greg's dad announced a vague family emergency, and we packed in a frenzy. Mark's gaze burned into me as we loaded the car, his silence more terrifying than any words. The ferry ride back was a blur, the drive home a tense, sleepless marathon. Greg's dad dropped Mark off first, then Jay and Greg, before pulling me aside. He urged me to keep quiet, citing the close ties between his family and Mark's. But when I got home, the dam broke. I sobbed to my parents, showing them the torn page. Their fury was immediate. They called the police, outraged that Greg's dad had tried to bury the incident. The police acted swiftly, obtaining a warrant and recovering the notebook. My belongings were returned except for the missing pen. Mark's family vanished and he never returned to school. I never saw Greg again. The friendship irreparably fractured. For years I tried to move on, to bury the trauma of that summer. But last week an anonymous letter arrived, its words chillingly simple. I remember everything. Wrapped inside was the pen Mark had stolen all those years ago. Now I live in constant fear, checking locks obsessively, jumping at every shadow. How did he find me? What does he want? I'm considering moving, but part of me wonders if running will only delay the inevitable. If anyone has advice, I'm desperate to hear it. Story 2. The Hunt in the Snow Winter. In my family is a sacred time, not for cozy fires or holiday cheer, but for a tradition that sets us apart from most. We're a clan of hunters and gun enthusiasts. Our vacation's less about relaxation and more about testing our mettle. Every year we rent a sprawling house in some remote corner of the country, usually deep in the woods, and spend a week indulging in games that blur the line between sport and survival. This year it was a grand cabin in Vermont, a fortress of timber and stone that could house our sprawling brood. At 18, I was finally old enough to join the adults in our strangest ritual, a midnight game of laser tag that was as much about strategy as it was about bragging rights. The cabin was a marvel, its vaulted ceilings and massive windows making it feel like a castle plucked from a fairy tale. But the woods surrounding it were dense and foreboding, the kind of place where shadows seemed to move on their own. Our family, cousins, aunts, uncles, and parents, at least a dozen strong, filled the space with raucous laughter and the clink of beer bottles. The laser tag game was the highlight of the trip, a tradition spearheaded by my Uncle Lucian, a grizzled outdoorsman with a penchant for theatrics. The rules were simple. Every man for himself, last one standing, wins a hefty cash prize. The catch? You had to survive until midnight in a forest that felt alive with secrets. As night fell, Lucian gathered us in the great room, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He handed out the laser guns, custom-built, industrial-grade beasts he'd crafted himself, and explained the markers we'd wear to register hits. "Set a 10-minute timer," he barked, his voice cutting through the chatter. "When it goes off, the game begins." Without warning, he sprinted into the woods, his silhouette swallowed by the darkness. The rest of us scattered, adrenaline pumping as we fanned out into the snow-covered forest. I chose a different path, heading downhill, while most of my relatives charged upward. The snow crunched under my boots, the moonlight filtering through bare branches to create a ghostly glow. I found a vantage point behind a gnarled oak, my breath visible in the frigid air. For a while I waited, scanning the hillside for movement. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant rustle of leaves and my own heartbeat. I decided to move, creeping along the slope to flank anyone above me. Time stretched, the cold seeping into my bones as I pushed deeper into the woods. Then I heard it, a faint crunch, not from the direction of the house, but from deeper in the forest. My pulse quickened. I ducked behind a tree, peering into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, but as my eyes adjusted, I spotted a trail of footprints, barely visible in the snow. They led to a thick pine about 15 yards away, and I was certain someone was hiding there. But why hadn't they tagged me? I'd been exposed, an easy target. The realization hit me like a jolt. Whoever it was wasn't playing by the rules. I bolted uphill, my heart pounding as I put distance between myself and the unseen stalker. As I ran, I noticed another set of footprints, this one stranger still. It started deep in the woods, looped toward me, and then retreated into the shadows. Had someone outmaneuvered me? The thought was unsettling. None of my relatives would venture that far from the house. Before I could process it, a louder sound came from below, the unmistakable thud of someone falling into the snow. I didn't wait to investigate. I sprinted toward the house, my lungs burning. Checking my phone, I was shocked to see it was past 11 p.m. Time had slipped away. I followed a fresh set of footprints, hoping to catch someone off guard. Through a line of trees, I spotted my cousin Corbo, his laser gun at the ready. I crouched, aimed, and hit his marker. It blinked red, and he cursed, slamming his fist against a tree before trudging back to the house. I grinned, the thrill of the kill fueling my confidence. Emboldened, I hatched a plan to ambush my stalker. I sprinted forward, then doubled back, hiding behind a tree with no visible trail to betray me. As I waited, my marker suddenly blinked. I'd been hit. Anger surged through me. The shot came from where I'd just been. Whoever was following me had outsmarted me. I stood expecting the laser to shut off, but it didn't. The beam stayed fixed on me, taunting me. Furious, I marched toward it, determined to confront the culprit. All I could see were hands gripping the gun, the rest of the figure concealed behind a tree. Then a sound shattered the silence. Gunshots, real ones, ringing out behind me. I froze, my mind reeling. The shot signaled the game's end. Corbo must have been the last kill. But if the game was over, who had tagged me? I stared at the laser beam, still trained on me, and watched as two figures stepped out from behind the tree. They weren't my relatives. They were strangers, their faces obscured by the darkness. Before I could react, a crunch came from behind. I whipped around to see a man in a ski mask, a trash bag in one hand and a knife gleaming in the other. He saw me and charged. I ran, screaming, my gear abandoned as I tore through the snow. The three figures pursued, their shouts guttural and incomprehensible, like a language from another world. My legs burned, my vision blurred, but I kept going, the lights of the cabin, my only hope. As I neared the clearing, I saw Lucian sprinting toward me, a hunting rifle in his hands. He raised it above my head and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard my pursuers stumble, then retreat into the woods. I collapsed at Lucian's feet, gasping, and blacked out. The next morning, the cabin was a hive of tension. My aunt revealed she dropped her laser gun after tripping, explaining how the strangers had acquired it. Corbo, it turned out, had tagged 6 others before I got him, making him the game's true victor. Lucian and my dad scoured the woods, but found only a maze of footprints leading nowhere. We reported the incident to the police, who were as baffled as we were. The day was a blur of arguments and fear, but the final shock came at dawn. Outside the cabin stood a lone snowman, its twig arm clutching my aunt's laser gun. Lucian, enraged, obliterated it with a few well-placed shots, his threats echoing into the silent forest. It's been a week, and the memory of that night haunts me. I'll update if anything else happens, but for now, I'm left wondering who those strangers were and what they wanted. Story 3, The Cabin in the Woods. Senior year of college was supposed to be my chance to seize the experiences I'd missed. While my peers jetted off to Cancun for spring break, I'd spent my first 3 years holed up on campus, my bank account too meager for extravagance. But this year, I was determined to make it different. My girlfriend Allie stumbled upon an Airbnb that promised a perfect escape. A secluded cabin in Lake County, California, nestled in a forest of towering pines. It wasn't the raucous beach party of my fantasies, but with a hot tub, a fireplace, and a vintage record player, it felt like a romantic retreat. We invited Allie's best friend Leah and her boyfriend Calvin, turning it into a double-date adventure none of us would forget, though not for the reasons we'd hoped. The drive was a study in contrasts. Calvin's Mini Cooper, a cramped convertible he was inexplicably touchy about, carried us through rolling hills and dense forests. Allie and Leah squeezed into the back seat, traded jokes about the car's size, earning glares from Calvin. But with the top down and the wind whipping through our hair, the journey felt like the start of something magical. We arrived at dusk, the cabin looming against a backdrop of shadowed trees. In daylight, it might have been charming, but in the dark, it was unsettling, its windows like empty eyes staring into the night. The first night was everything we'd hoped for. We gathered around the fireplace, the crackle of burning logs mingling with the soft croon of vinyl records. A bottle of wine loosened our tongues, and we laughed over board games, the stresses of college melting away. Calvin was oddly subdued, brushing off our invitations to the hot tub with a vague excuse. We chalked it up to a bad mood and let it slide, too caught up in the moment to press him. The second night, we coaxed Calvin into the hot tub, a glassed-in oasis attached to the cabin's rear. The room's screen walls let in the cool night air, and we blasted music, playing drinking games under a canopy of stars. The wine flowed, and our laughter echoed, the forest beyond forgotten. Then, without warning, a blinding flash illuminated the room, so intense it could have been lightning, if not for the clear sky. The music died as I fumbled with the speaker, and we exchanged nervous glances, the air thick with unspoken fear. I slipped out of the tub, my bare feet cold against the deck as I scanned the woods. The darkness was impenetrable, but then I heard it, a sharp click, like a twig snapping, coming from the trees. Seconds later, another click sounded, this time from a different direction. A low whistle followed, then another, the sounds multiplying, encircling us. My heart raced. "Get inside," I shouted, ushering Allie, Leah, and Calvin into the cabin. We huddled in the living room, the cheerful glow of the fireplace now a mockery of safety. At first, we tried to rationalize it, maybe kids from a neighboring house pulling a prank, but the sounds had been too deliberate, too coordinated. Minutes passed in tense silence, and just as we began to relax, a thunderous banging erupted at the front door. Allie and Leah screamed, their faces pale. I grabbed a kitchen knife, its weight reassuring in my hand, while Calvin fumbled with his phone, calling 911. "I've got a gun!" I bellowed at the door, a desperate lie. To my relief, the banging stopped. We waited, the seconds stretching into eternity. The police were on their way, but in this remote corner of the world, help felt impossibly far. Then a crash shattered the silence. A massive rock hurtled through the living room window, glass sprang across the floor. Allie and Leah shrieked, and I shouted for them to run upstairs and lock the door. Calvin followed, his phone still pressed to his ear. I stayed below, knife in hand, braced for an intruder who never came. When I approached the broken window, I saw it, a piece of paper taped to the rock, its message scrawled in jagged black ink. "Go away. You shouldn't be here." The words sent a chill down my spine. The police arrived soon after, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the property. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone. Exhausted and terrified, we packed our bags and fled, the Mini Cooper speeding through the night. The Airbnb host issued a refund but dodged our questions, their evasiveness fueling Allie's suspicion that they knew more than they let on. Was the cabin's low price a lure, hiding some dark history? I don't know. What I do know is that the memory of that night, the clicking, the whistling, the rock through the window, has killed any desire for another vacation. Some places, it seems, don't want to be found.